Okay, hello and welcome to the Score Boord Podcast. I'm your host, Rivka Board of Jets X Factor, bringing you the best New York Jets content on the internet. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Subscribe to jetsxfactor.com with discount code 80 and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Today we're joined by a special guest, Tony Del Genio of Big Blue View, writes about the Giants. Tony, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me, Rivka.
Okay, so now you have a preseason game of Daniel Jones under your belt, at least some of it. What's the feeling around the Giants on Daniel Jones and what to expect from him this season?
Well, that's a question that depends on whom you ask about the Giants, right? So, Giants fans, I would say, are more inclined to be done with Daniel Jones, and they're just ready to move on. They're sorry the Giants weren't able to trade up for a quarterback. They are sorry they decided not to go for, let's say JJ McCarthy with the number 6 draft pick. And there's probably more of those fans out there, at least the ones who participate in social media, than there are fans who have a more positive view of him. I think even the most positive fans would admit that Jones has not become the quarterback they need him to be if the Giants are to become a serious playoff contender. And there is a serious question about whether he ever can be. He had a very good 2022 season, but during that season, Brian Daboll asked him to do a relatively small number of things. And what's going on right now, and I actually just have a piece on Big Blue View that just went up about an hour ago, is that Brian Daboll is trying to recreate Daniel Jones. He's trying to turn him into a quarterback that he has not been for the last few years, and that maybe he has never been. And that is a quarterback who takes shots downfield, who takes chances, who tries to make the big throw, what PFF would call a big time throw. And big time throws tend to be a characteristic of the best quarterbacks in the game. And we saw the first results on Saturday when the Giants were in Houston. The first quarter, he came out and he was absolutely awful, throwing a couple of the worst passes you've ever seen on the very first play of the game, a pass that should have been intercepted by Derek Stingley, but wasn't. And then the most awful play of the game, where they were backed up in their own end zone after stopping Houston, and he dropped back and was about to be tackled for a safety, and he made a panicked pass trying to get it to Theo Johnson, tight end, and it was pick sixed by Jalen Petrie. So, that was the bad Daniel Jones. But then, as you went on into later in the first quarter, especially the second quarter, then he started to make some really nice throws. He finally hooked up with Malik Neighbors on a really nice sideline pass, had a 44-yard pass across the hashes down the left sideline to Darius Slayton that got down to the 1 yard line, and a couple of things like that. And so, this is where the Giants stand right now, is that they're at the beginning of this grand experiment to make Daniel Jones into the type of player who could actually help them make a serious run. And the clock is ticking. I think it's safe to say that by mid-season, we're going to have the answer to that question. And the reason we haven't had the answer before is because the Giants have had a putrid offensive line for almost the entire time he's been here. And this year, it looks like they finally have addressed that problem. And the Giants have never had a true wide receiver 1. And this year, it certainly looks as if they've addressed that. So we've got about maybe half a season to see whether Jones has more in him than he's shown so far. And if he doesn't, then the Giants will be in the pickle of having to figure out how to get a franchise quarterback. And by the way, as a Giants fan, I should say that and I should have said this at the beginning, I come in peace to all the Jets fans. I go back all the way to 1960 when the franchise was formed as the New York Titans. I remember Billy Mathis and Art Powell and Larry Grantham and all those people on the original Titans. And I've always rooted for the Jets when they weren't playing the Giants. But I am annoyed, though, that the Jets came back and defeated Washington in the last minute with a field goal last season, which gave Washington the number 2 draft pick and allowed them to get Jaden Daniels. And so I don't know if I can forgive the Jets for that.
Well, I think many Jets fans are just as annoyed by that because it hurt the Jets draft position too. If the Jets hadn't won some of those games at the end of the season, they could have gotten Malik Neighbors instead of the Giants, which is probably the idea was the Jets tried to trade up with the Giants. They wanted Rome Odunze. That was the receiver they really were going after. And so they probably could have gotten him if they hadn't won. Like they beat New England in the last week of the season. If they hadn't, they would have had the number 8 pick. And then they probably could have drafted They could have drafted Odunze, which was the guy they really wanted. And so I think many Jets fans would agree with you that the Jets beating Washington was not necessarily a good thing for the Jets or the Giants.
Yeah, unfortunately, and the Giants, of course, the Giants caused some of their own problems by winning what people would call meaningless games down the stretch. They actually had a couple of nice wins in the second half of the season. They beat Green Bay on Monday Night Football with Tommy DeVito at quarterback, and they beat Philadelphia in the last game of the season, and so it's actually those things that make you think that the Giants as a team were not as bad as they looked last year. The question is how good they can possibly be. When I look at the Giants and compare them to the Jets, let's set injuries aside because injuries are unpredictable, okay, and you never know who's going to go down for the season, as Jet fans know all too well from your experience last year. But barring injuries to key players, I think the Jets now have a roster that probably your low end result is that you contend for a wild card and lose out on a tiebreaker. But I think the Jets are guaranteed to be at least a reasonably good team this year. They're solid at so many positions. And the upside for the Jets is a possible Super Bowl berth. The Giants, there's no way the Giants are getting to the Super Bowl this year. The Giants, I would say their high-end possibility is to kind of make the playoffs the way they did in 2022 and maybe sneak in a playoff win if they get the right opponent in the first round. Their low-end result, if the Daniel Jones experiment just blows up, and then they don't have Tyrod Taylor anymore to come in and play a few games for them. He's now a Jet. Their low end result could be a really bad result, like 4-13 or 5-12 or something like that. So the Giants have this, I think, wide range of outcomes, all health issues aside, depending on what happens with the Jones experiment.
Yeah, I think that's, in the national media, I think their expectation is more that low end result. I think around the Giants, there might be some mix. This is the thing about when you cover a team. You get so focused on your own players and your own team and who's going to be good and who's not. You tend to get a little bit more optimistic, I think, overall about your team. And then nationally, people just see the results and they make their own. So we've seen that with the Jets, too, where like at Jets X Factor, we tend a lot of times to overrate Jets players because you're seeing them in a vacuum, not necessarily compared to other players around the league. So, some of the Giants, like I had not too long ago, I had Mike Tanier, formerly of Football Outsiders, and now of FTN and his own Substack. I had him on my podcast. And what he was saying, he actually wrote an article today in his Substack talking about how he was basically making fun of the Giants and saying how bad they're going to be. And, again, if you're covering the Giants day in, day out, you see the potential and the positives. So, you kind of get this thought that, oh, maybe they could be better. But nationally, I think that's not the expectation.
Oh, it definitely is not the expectation nationally. And the other thing about the Giants is that although I think they've improved and they've added a few really good pieces, not only Malik Neighbors, right, but Brian Burns at the other edge to give them maybe a more credible pass rush than they've had in a while. They're not a deep team. Even where they're good, they're not a deep team. And so you can't set injuries aside because injuries are going to happen. And the Giants are a team where if certain key players get injured, the people who are backing them up are just not very good professionals. And so really everything has to align just right in order for the Giants to become a pretty decent team this year.
Yeah. Now, moving on to just a different topic. Maurice Jones-Drew of NFL.com recently ranked Devin Singletary the worst starting running back in the NFL. What's your take on that? Like on what he said, and just what do you expect from Singletary this season?
Okay, I have a few things to say about that. I haven't gone through all 32 starting running backs in the NFL, so I can't tell you whether I would put him at the bottom yet. I wouldn't put him in the top half of starting running backs in the NFL, but I think Devin Singletary is a pretty good running back. And Giants fans are, wondering what life is going to be like without Saquon Barkley. And there's a very big difference of opinion within Giant fandom versus outside Giant fandom about that question. Outside Giants fandom, everyone seems to think that Barkley is going to have a tremendous year and the Giants are going to be in absolute trouble without him because he was the focus of the offense for the last 4 or 5 years. And that might be the case. But Devin Singletary is actually a very capable back. And so I believe he had 1,000 yards last year with Houston. And he was a good back for Buffalo. So he looks good with the Giants. He looked good, the few times we've seen him. Not that we've seen much of him so far. But the two other things that I would add are that, number one, the NFL is mostly not a running league anymore. And so I'm not sure how good a running back you have to have. It's nice if you have a premier running back. And so if you're going to tell me, would I take Breece Hall on the Giants? Yeah, I'd take Breece Hall on the Giants. He's a pretty special player, right? And there are a few more like that. So Brian Daboll is someone who has never wanted to run his offense through the running game. As soon as he got Josh Allen up to speed in Buffalo in his third year, he turned Buffalo into a passing first team. And that's what he wants to do. And that's what he's trying to do to the Giants this year. And so if he's successful in doing that, then it really doesn't matter exactly how good a back Devin Singletary is. He's a good enough back for a team that will live by the pass. If they can't live by the pass and they have to run, then yeah, he's not enough. The other thing, though, is that the Giants have acquired some really interesting depth at the running back position. They drafted Eric Gray last year in the 5th round, and he showed absolutely nothing last season, but he's looking good this season. And I think part of that is that the offensive line is doing a better job of opening up holes. And maybe he's getting better coaching too. I'm not sure. But in addition to him, the Giants drafted Tyrone Tracy in the 5th round this year, who's a converted wide receiver. And he has looked really good. He's on the shelf right now with an injury, but that's supposed to not be serious. And then they got this undrafted free agent from Columbia who went to Columbia, and that is Dante Turbo Miller, who's a very raw prospect, but with tremendous speed. And I don't know if they're going to keep all 4 of those backs on the 53. I mean, they may want to try to stash Miller on the practice squad. I'm not sure. But they have some intriguing depth at the running back position, all of them having the attributes of quickness and a couple of them outright speed. And, while none of them is going to be a Pro Bowl player, I think the Giants will have a perfectly capable running back, partly because I think they have a capable offensive line now. And so I don't really think that Maurice Jones-Drew's criticism matters that much. Is the bottom line.
I mean, I would tend to agree overall. I read his running back rankings. Sometimes I agree with them, sometimes I don't. I was actually interested in hearing, because I kind of wanted the Jets to draft Eric Gray last year and Tyrone Tracy this year. Now I'm happy with the backs they drafted. But I was curious what you think. Let's say if Singletary scuffled early, do you think Tracy and or Gray could start push him for sort of a committee situation? I think fantasy football fans players would want to know that too.
I think that's definitely a possibility. None of these players, I think, is even seen as a workhorse running back the way Barkley was used. And I mean, I can envision a situation where Singletary gets uh, the vast majority of the snaps, but I can easily imagine a situation in which Gray and maybe especially Tracy get a significant number of snaps. Just because you can use Tracy a little bit in the passing game, because he actually started as a wide receiver and he couldn't cut it in college as a wide receiver. And one of his coaches basically told him, look, you're not getting drafted as a wide receiver. How'd you like to change to running back? And, when you watch him, he just has great ability to avoid and or break tackles. And so I think behind a line, he can open up some holes. He can do some business, but I don't think any of those guys on the Giants. I don't do fantasy at all, but I don't think any of those players on the Giants is someone you want to put on your fantasy roster, except as a late round pick.
So it's interesting you say that, because my take on Singletary is that his average draft position, his ADP, is way too high. Like, I've been doing mock drafts on PFF, and they're like pushing me to take him in the, I don't know, like the 6th or 7th round in a 16-round draft. Like, what on earth? Like, I think this guy is going to be maybe more than not of a platoon player.
Yeah,
kind of like he was for at the beginning of the year last year. Like, it was him and Damian Pierce. Then he pulled ahead because Pierce was so bad. But I see him more as a platoon type, and I thought Tracy might be able to push him a bit.
Yeah, and again,
And
again, this is yet another thing that depends on what happens with Daniel Jones, right? So if Daniel Jones can turn into a good passing quarterback, a good enough passing quarterback to run the offense that Dable wants to, then Dable will de-emphasize the running game in general, regardless of what the running backs are doing. He'll de-emphasize the running game. It will only be if Jones reverts to what he was last year or what he was under Joe Judge, that they'll lean more on the running game. But even then, I just don't see Singletary being the every down back. I think it's definitely going to be backed by committee.
Now, getting back to what you said about Saquon Barkley. So I guess my take on it is that the Giants did the right thing by letting him go. And at the same time, he could have a really good year on the Eagles. But it just wasn't worth, like, the Eagles signed him as a piece towards a contending for a Super Bowl. The Giants would have been signing him as, maybe their feature player, but they're not really, their goal this year, as you said, their best outcome is maybe sneaking into the playoffs. So signing Barkley wouldn't have made sense in that kind of context. So I know people were making fun of Joe Shane after Hard Knocks about, the discussions, and they felt like he didn't do a good job of it. I thought he was fine, at least from the perspective of when you're on a running back, and there's this concept, at least in the analytical community, like running backs don't matter. Like, there's a lot more. If you look at the numbers, you can tell more about how many yards are going to be gained at the, let's say when you hand it off, by the blocking than you can by the name of the player. And so therefore, like, there's a very reasonable thing to say, like, as good as Barkley may have seemed, it just didn't make sense for the Giants to give him the deal like that.
Yeah, I agree. And I think what it boils down to is Joe Shane's philosophy, Brian Dable's philosophy of how he wants to build a team, and Joe Shane's philosophy of how he wants to handle the Jets' finances. All right, how did the Eagles sign Saquon Barkley? And the answer is because Howie Roseman doesn't mind putting hundreds of millions of dollars of contract costs into void years. He has something like $400 million in void years, I believe, on the Eagles. Shane does not want to operate that way. And you can debate whether Howie Roseman is a genius or whether he's eventually going to get the Eagles into trouble or whatever. But whatever your feeling about that is, it's just a difference in how you approach team finances. And so Shane is relatively conservative about how he approaches team finances. And so it's easy for Howie Roseman because he doesn't have to find $12 million anywhere. Whereas Joe Schoen looks at it as, I've got to find $12 million, mostly within my existing budget and not pushing it out to the future. So you can debate whether that's a good or a bad thing. What I would say is that if you are going to push a tremendous amount of costs into the future, you want to do it for a contending team. And that's the other thing in all of this is, where do you think your franchise is at? Howie Roseman sees the Eagles in their Super Bowl window, and rightfully so. Obviously, they were there a couple of years ago and were just one or two plays away from possibly winning it. The Giants are not in their Super Bowl window yet, right? And so you don't want to be, I think, building up large costs for the future while you're still working toward that. So I was perfectly fine with what he did. I had more trouble the year before that, when there was this chance to sign him at the over the bye, and they weren't able to get together with Barkley's agent. But I thought that was at least as much at the fault of Barkley's agent as it was of Joe Schoen. Either way, I'm at peace with that now. And unlike Giants fans now who see Barkley as the villain and they can't wait for him to fail as an Eagle, I really think Barkley's a nice guy, and I respect the kind of player he's been and all he did for the Giants. And I hope he has a good year for the Eagles, other than the 2 games when they play against the Giants.
Okay, I'm not as charitable as a fan in general. I'm like, you go to another team, especially when they were being criticized for letting you go, you could be as bad as possible. Yeah. That's more my take on it. But I wanted to move on a little bit just to talk about the Giants' offensive line, because you mentioned that you think they're going to be better. They outbid the Jets for John Runyon and for Jermaine Illuminor, both guys that the Jets were looking into, so the Jets kind of went elsewhere and got reasonably decent, replacements for them, particularly Morgan Moses at right tackle.
Yeah.
I think the Giants had the yeah. Well, Tyron Smith was a left tackle, but I mean, even at right tackle and left guard, particularly right tackle, if they couldn't get Illuminor, trading for Morgan Moses on a $5.5 million deal for 1 year was not a bad idea at all. Now, the impression I got, though, from the Giants, from Runyon and Illuminor, and even Greg Van Roten to an extent, who Jet fans know and hate, but he was the one who fell on Mekhi Becton's leg and caused the season-ending injury in Becton's second year. So, the Jet fans really don't like him. But the thing is, they all seem to be better pass blockers than run blockers. Like, at least from, cursory, again, I haven't watched all their film, but from cursory, if you're looking at stats, you're looking at PFF grades, you're looking at whatever you can find about it, short of watching every single snap on a player who hasn't, let's say, been on your team. Do you believe that that's the case? And if so, does that, let's say, still maybe hurt the Giants' run game a little bit more, but help their protection for Daniel Jones?
So,
would you agree with that assessment?
I do agree with that assessment. I mean, it's early yet, so I wouldn't pound the table for that point of view just yet. I think we need to see more of them, and we especially need to see them in real games rather than just exhibition games. But they have been, the line as a whole has been very good in pass protection during the preseason, and that's not only the 2 games that they've played, but also in the scrimmages against the Detroit Lions. And one of the things that I really like about what the Giants are doing this year is how they've set up their preseason. They scrimmaged against the Lions and had their first preseason game. Then they played Houston, and now they're going to have a scrimmage, 1-day scrimmage against the Jets, or practice, whatever you want to call it, with the Jets, and then play the Jets. And so those are 3 tough teams they're seeing in the preseason, and 3 teams that can get after the quarterback. And so the Giants linemen held up very well against the Lions pass rush in the scrimmages, which are the things that matter, because the game the Lions just played back. The Lions and the Giants played mostly backups, but during the scrimmages they did very well. I think we saw against Houston on Sunday that the run blocking leaves something to be desired for these players, and not so much in the Detroit game. But again, the Detroit game, you were playing against a lot of backups, and so you're not getting the same view of things. What I suspect is that they're going to be, let's say, borderline adequate when it comes to run blocking, and that might be enough because they have running backs who kind of know how to hit the hole quickly, make their cut and go, and not dance around a lot, waiting for something to happen. And so I think they can still have an effective running game. But again, going back to who the Giants head coach is, I think Brian Daboll wants good pass blockers first, and the running game we'll do with the running game what we can do with the running game. But I agree with you, though, that these guys are better pass blockers than run blockers.
I mean, the Jets essentially took the same approach to a large extent. They drafted Olu Fashanu, who was known for his pass blocking and definitely not his run blocking. And, in general, several of their players are better. They try to get, better pass blockers, players who get, not John Simpson, but I mean, Tyron Smith has always been known particularly for his pass pro. And so I think the Jets took a similar approach. Again, in today's NFL, yes, pass blocking is king. And so, that's why the Jets went after Runyon and Illuminor, because they wanted the guys who can protect the passer. And so the Giants definitely seem to have a better setup for Jones to at least see what he can possibly be, where he's not running for his life all the time.
Yeah. And the other thing that the Giants did, which may be just as important as the players they've signed for the offensive line, is they went out and hired Carmen Brasillo from the Las Vegas Raiders. And if you look at last year, the Raiders had something like the 10th or 12th best offensive line in the NFL. But if you look at the names on their offensive line, it's a bunch of who, and it includes people like Van Roten, and Van Roten actually had a good year as a Raider last year, better than anything he did while he was a Jet, for sure. Illuminor has turned into kind of a nice right tackle, and I mean, he's played both sides, but he's none of these guys are a threat to make the Pro Bowl, that's for sure, but they are definitely a threat to be capable. And and when you're coming from the depths that the Giants came from, the Giants offensive line last year, take PFF grades for what they are, but the Giants offensive line as a whole last year came up with the worst season blocking grade, I think, on both the pass blocking and run blocking side that PFF has ever recorded in its approximately 20-year history. That's how bad it was for the Giants last year. And I went back actually and looked, and you could even see that in the Giants preseason games, where they weren't even playing all the time against the other team's starters. They had awful pass blocking and run blocking grades last preseason, and so this preseason their pass blocking grades are in the 60s, 70s, even occasionally one in the 80s, and the run blocking has been sort of like 60-ish. That jives with your earlier statement that they're better pass blockers than run blockers, but I look at that and say, well, let's hope that this year is the preseason's a harbinger of the regular season, the way it seemed to be in the opposite direction last year. And I'm and you watch the games, and the quarterback is getting time to throw. There's an actual pocket forming, which is something you just didn't see very much last year for the Giants. And so I'm relatively optimistic about that aspect of things.
I mean, and Brasillo is known as a very good offensive line coach in general. I mean, that was a big coup for the Giants in signing him. As you said, he took a bunch of no names and basically turned them into a more than adequate offensive line. And so not just, you hope that they're adequate because of the individual names, but also because they'll finally be getting, really quality coaching.
Yeah. And when you're watching them, and I'm certainly no expert on blocking, but when you watch them, they look like they're communicating well with each other. They're handling stunts, which the Giants haven't been able to handle stunts in, I don't know, at least 5 years, maybe longer than that. But these guys are handling stunts. They're passing people off to the other guy. They're going and looking for work when they've made their block and they're not down yet. The play's still going on. They're going downfield looking for someone else. So I think all signs point to Brasillo as being a good offensive line coach. The thing I always wonder about for the Giants, I mean, their blocking has been bad ever since Brian Dable got here, but it was especially bad last year. And I said, well, what was different about? I mean, they had injuries and stuff like that, but even other than the injuries, their blocking was so terrible. And the one thing that I noticed that was different between Dable's first year and second year was that they had an assistant offensive line coach, Tony Sperano Jr., who left after his first year to become the offensive line coach for the Colts. Lo and behold, the Colts turned into one of the better offensive lines in the NFL last season. Meanwhile, the Giants became the absolute worst. And I wondered, well, what was Bobby Johnson actually doing as Giants offensive line coach? 2 years. Was all the work being done by the assistant OL coach? I don't know, but whatever the reason, they seem to have a pretty good one now.
Now, the one offensive lineman I wanted to ask you about, I know last year, in the 2023 draft, Ed Valentine, had a Big Blue View, so he liked Joe Tippmann over John Michael Schmitz, which was not a popular, let's say, opinion. Generally, when you look at draft people, most people preferred John Michael Schmitz, and they had Tippmann either as number 2, number 3 in centers. Last year, Tippmann was average-ish, maybe a little below average. John Michael Schmitz he dealt with a lot of injuries, but he was very bad. Mm-hmm. I know he was dealing with injuries this year during training camp too, but what is the outlook for him in year 2 in terms of improving? Again, he had a very good pedigree. People expected the Jets to take him at number 43. He fell to the Giants at number 57. I'm sure they were thrilled. So what's the expectation in terms of how he can improve in year 2?
Yeah. So the situation with John Michael Schmitz is that he got injured last year in the Seattle debacle, one of many debacle games for the Giants early last season. He got injured in that game on a tush-push play, of all things, and had a shoulder injury that seemed to bother him for the rest of the year. And he eventually came back and played some. And he had another shoulder injury this year in camp. And he did play 15 snaps against Houston on Saturday, did well in run blocking, but had a terrible game pass blocking. And so I mentioned that in a piece I wrote after the game, that this is something that the Giants are going to have to keep an eye on, whether he can actually develop into a more effective pass blocker. Right now, he just is not. And I think the knock on John Michael Schmitz is that he just doesn't have the, I don't want to say the size so much, but the play strength that you necessarily need to be a really effective center. And, and that's, and we will never know whether the Giants had Tippmann higher on their board than Schmitz, since the Jets took Tippmann before the Giants had a chance. But there were a lot of people who actually thought that Tippmann might have been the better choice than Schmitz. But I think it also was true that most people thought that Schmitz would at least be an adequate center. And he still might be. He's not a bad run blocker. He just so far is just not doing the job as a pass blocker. But it's early on. He's only had 15 snaps in one game. And again, if we have confidence that Brasillo is a good offensive line coach, and if we have confidence that this year he's going to have guards on either side of him who are actually capable veterans, right, then that they can nurse him along and make him into at least an adequate pass blocker. All that said, it wasn't a mirage that he was blocking poorly on Saturday in Houston. As soon as they took him out of the game and put, I guess it was Austin Schlottman, who's kind of a journeyman offensive lineman, in at center to replace him, the blocking got much better. So it was a real thing that he was having trouble holding his own there in the middle. I said the question is just whether he's big enough and strong enough in a play strength. I don't think anybody cares about the actual size. It's the play strength that you had. And this was the knock on Nick Gates, right? Giants fans loved Nick Gates when he was the center for the Giants. They loved the spunk that he had, and he'd get into fights and everything like that. And all of that was great. But he got pushed around as a center, right? And so, in fact, the Giants have a long history of centers getting pushed around. John Jalapeno before him, and they've just had guys in there who just couldn't quite get the job done, even if you liked them. And so, we'll see about JMS. He's a good guy. He's a hard worker. He's not a problem as a person, but we'll see how good a player he can become.
Yeah, I think the Jets took Tippmann over JMS because he was a better pass blocker in college. I think the Jets were looking for that pass blocking, strength, and I think that's why they took him.
Which is ironic, right? Considering Tippmann was out of Wisconsin, is that right?
Yeah.
It's not the school you think of when you think passing, right?
Yeah, I mean, and the truth is,
he had a better reputation as a pass blocker.
Yeah. I mean, look, the truth is he struggled with snapping out of shotgun because Wisconsin plays under center 80% of the time. And so that is one thing we've seen a lot in training camp, but just in terms of the pure pass blocking. And I'm not saying Tippmann was great in pass blocking as a rookie. He wasn't, but he definitely showed a lot more potential than JMS.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think
now,
so.
Go ahead. I wanted to turn it over to the defensive side of the ball because you mentioned the Giants traded for Brian Burns. And so at Jets X Factor, we tend to place a lot of emphasis on pressure rates, not just sacks and things like that, because we're just in general, it's like, how did you affect the quarterback on a play-in, play-out basis, and not just did you make one flashy play and then go silent for the rest of the game, which I think Giants fans would know about to an extent from Kayvon Thibodeau, right? 11.5 sacks last year, but went silent for large portions of games. The thing is, when you look at Burns, and he got like the third highest APY for any edge rusher in terms of, in his contract. But when you look at his pressure rates, for the most part, he's never been higher than 13.6% in his career. The average for edge rushers last year was 11.6%. If you look at the top edge rushers in the game, a lot of them are like 17%, 16, 17, 18%. And so what's your thought on the trade for Brian Burns? Will it help the Giants as much as they thought it will? Because obviously they thought it would when they gave him the money. And overall, let's say you have Thibodeau, him, and Dexter Lawrence. Is that going to be enough to spur the Giants pass rush?
Yeah. So I thought when the trade happened that the money was too much. On the other hand, I liked the fact that they got the deal done and got his signature on the dotted line before they made the trade. That's maybe a little sensitive too right now with the Haason Reddick situation brewing for them. But that's also and what I've come to believe. You mentioned earlier that the Giants offered Illuminor and Runyon $1 million more than the Jets offered to get them to come in, and I've developed this thinking that within reason, it's okay to go higher than you really think you should go, because the salary cap is such a flexible thing with how you're allowed to structure contracts that when you have a conviction on a person, especially at a position of need, that it's okay to go higher than you really think you should have gone. Although from Hard Knocks, it seemed to me that they were thinking they'd have to give Burns $28 million right from the very start. That wasn't how I felt about things. I thought they could get him for, say, I don't know, 25 or something like that. And the thing is, the guy who's a free agent now is always the one who's going to try to set the new level of compensation, right? And we see this in all the time in dramatic fashion with quarterbacks, right? It's everybody's wondering how much Dak Prescott is going to sign for. Well, Dak Prescott is not the best quarterback in the NFL, But if he winds up signing for $60 million a year, whether that's with the Cowboys or somebody else, is anybody going to be that surprised? Actually, it's because he's the next one in line, right? And just as at one point Trevor Lawrence was the next one in line. Is Trevor Lawrence worth 50 some odd million dollars a year? I don't think so. Is Jordan Love, after one season as starter, which admittedly was a very good season, is he worth a 50 something million dollar contract? And so on. Even Justin Herbert, who looks like one of the best quarterbacks in the game, but can't seem to get a team into the playoffs and win a playoff game after a few years. Is he worth the salary that he's getting? How many of these guys actually are worth the money that they're making? And it's just the way salaries go in the NFL this year. So I don't lose too much sleep over the contract that Brian Burns got, because the Giants did managed to bring in somebody at a position of need, and edge was really a position of need for the Giants, because Thibodeau, although he's been good, has been inconsistent. Thibodeau has his games where he shows up and dominates, and you say, yeah, this is the guy who was the number 5 draft pick. And then there are other games when you ask yourself, what game was over, did Thibodeau play tonight? He just disappears. And unfortunately, on the other side, where the Giants have had Azeez Ojulari, who I thought was a great pick in the second round for them in 2021, he's just had injury after injury. And then when he's come back and played, he just hasn't been effective. And so far this preseason, he also hasn't been effective. And so I don't know if he has much of a future with the Giants, but they needed someplace else to get a third bit of pressure other than from Thibodeau and from Dexter Lawrence, who's their number one pressure guy, amazingly. So Burns has looked good in camp this summer. He's been getting a lot of pressure. He did very well in the scrimmages against the Lions offensive linemen. And they've got one of the better defensive lines in the NFL. He looked good against Houston. Had a nice spin move to get a pressure in that game. So, and maybe another thing about Burns is that he seems like a good guy. And if we're talking about Giants philosophy, the Giants under Joe Shane seem to place a big emphasis on bringing in good guys. They don't want
Thibodeau, a notable exception.
Thibodeau was potentially the notable exception, except that he hasn't really caused any problems with the Giants. And
true.
Right. And so, it didn't take the Giants long to get rid of Kadarius Toney. And I look at guys who are available that they don't even try to bring in, and I say, I wonder why they're not trying to get this guy. And then you look at the guy's reputation in the NFL, and you say, well, maybe he's one of these people that they think is more of a pain in the neck than he's worth, and so they get rid of him, or they don't look to bring that player in. And Burns doesn't seem to have any of those issues. He's immediately become a leader in the locker room. He's looked good so far on the field. You're absolutely right that his production so far has not been in line with, let's say, the top 5 or 10 edge defenders in the game, and we'll see what it is this year. So I've got a wait and see attitude about that. I'm glad to have him, and I think he's a definite upgrade over anything the Giants have had on that side in many years. Whether he's enough of an upgrade to justify what they're paying him, I'm a little bit doubtful about that myself, but we'll see.
Okay, I definitely appreciate that answer, because you mentioned all the quarterbacks. I'm very much like, it drives me crazy when guys get paid so much more than they're worth. And so I look at that and say, I'm not doing that. But honestly, if you have such a big need and you can get a player who's still pretty young and in the prime of their career, sometimes you have to make that cost benefit analysis and just decide, okay, we're going to go for this, even if it's not necessarily 100% at the number that you would want.
Yeah, and I think that's what the Giants also did at offensive line. Although, we're talking about much smaller amounts of money there. We're talking about paying Illuminor $7 million rather than $6 million, and Runyon $10 million versus whatever it was, $8 or $9 million or something like that. And so those are much smaller gambles than the gamble on Burns is. And coming back to Daniel Jones, who's got the biggest salary hit of all, still the $40 million average annual value of his salary of his contract is now, I think, 14th or 15th, I believe, in the NFL after just a couple of years. And as soon as Prescott signs his contract, he'll be, I think, 15th or 16th, something like that, in the NFL. So in other words, he'll be getting paid like a quote unquote mid quarterback. And I kind of think that's who Daniel Jones is. He's not a terrible quarterback. I think he's a mid quarterback. If you put a good line in front of him, he's a guy who can win some games for you, but is going to lose some games for you too. And yeah, he's better than the worst starting quarterbacks in the NFL, but he's not as good as the best starting quarterbacks in the NFL by a long shot. And I think that's where he's going to wind up. And his annual average value reflects that. And the other thing about his value is that people always look at the top line number, the total contract value or the average annual value. But the number that people should always look at in any of these contracts is the guaranteed money. And in the case of Jones, they can get rid of him after this year and they swallow something like $22 million in dead money, but that's it. And his contract is gone. I forget how much guaranteed money there is in Burns's contract, so I'll have to see. But I
didn't check that.
Yeah, but what I do think though is that Burns is more of a guarantee to provide you at least plus play at the edge defender position, even if it's not elite play.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, I there definitely is a difference there. When Jones signed that contract, I think he was a lot higher, and even in terms of guaranteed money per year, like he got $81, $82 million guaranteed, something like that. So whereas other quarterbacks were not getting $40 million guaranteed in 2 years.
Right.
Yeah. So, but I guess now it doesn't look quite as bad, even though it looks worse in terms of Jones's play. In terms of the amount of money he's getting relative to other quarterbacks, it's more in line, as you said. Yeah. Now,
in retrospect, Joe Schoen walked into a very unfortunate situation where he had Jones coming off a season where he had yet another injury and was up for either whether you're going to pick up his fifth-year option or not. And of course, if they had picked up his fifth-year option, that would have given them more flexibility in trying to deal with him. But I can't blame them for not picking up his option because he hadn't shown anything that would warrant having done that. And then you had Barkley kind of coming up at the same time. And who do you use your franchise tag on and so on? Most people think in retrospect they should have used the franchise tag on Jones and tried to do more for Barkley. But it's always easy to be wise about these things after the fact. When you're actually faced with the situation, it's hard to know what the best decision is. Almost everyone agrees that he paid Jones too much. I think people thought that Jones should at best get something in the 30 to 35 range, if not even lower than that for some Giants fans. But yeah, it is what it is. And next year they'll either have someone who's turned into a Super Bowl contending quarterback, or he'll be gone.
Yeah. Now, one debate I think the Jets and Giants fans would like to have is who's better, Quinnen Williams or Dexter Lawrence? Considered two of the best. I mean, among two of the three best defensive tackles in the NFL now that Aaron Donald retired. It's basically Chris Jones, Dexter Lawrence, Quinnen Williams in any order that you want to put them. Now, let's say I think PFF put Lawrence over Williams. I think I don't remember if the ESPN poll, if they put which one they put in what position. There were a few rankings. Some had Williams over Lawrence. Some had Lawrence over Williams. Now, the one point, I mean, they play completely different roles. Williams is a 3 technique. He plays over guards. Lawrence plays 0 or 1. He basically, he plays over the center head up over the center more than anyone else in the NFL. And he's more successful at it than anyone else in the NFL. Mm-hmm. That being said, Williams had a better PFF run defense grade, a higher pressure rate, and I wrote down the other stat. Higher pressure rate and more sacks than Dexter Lawrence last year. Mm-hmm. So given that, if you had to give your opinion, and I know I watched every snap of Quinnen Williams last year. You watched last year you watched every snap of Dexter Lawrence. I mean, technically, I watched really every snap of both. But if you had to give your opinion, why is Dexter Lawrence better than Quinnen Williams? I ask it that way, not.
So, if I'm going to answer that, well, first of all, I'll say that the point that you raised about the different roles that they play, that all had to do with bringing Andre Patterson to the Giants from Minnesota as the defensive line coach, and Dexter Lawrence started his career as doing a lot more three technique, and it was Patterson who said he wanted to line him up in zero, right? And that really seemed to unlock Dexter Lawrence. That it's a fair point to say that they're playing different positions. I, like you, in reverse, I have not seen Quinnen Williams as much as I've seen Dexter Lawrence. I've seen, I think, virtually every snap that Dexter Lawrence has played as a Giants, and really I only see Quinnen Williams when I happen to watch a Jet game, which is many weeks, but not every week. And when I'm watching a Jet game, I'm not focusing on him specifically. I'm looking at other guys as well. I think that my argument in favor of Dexter Lawrence is that regardless of where you put him, he's been amazingly effective in what he's doing. And perhaps the more important thing is that he has just about no help on the defensive line. Whereas I think the Jets have had a somewhat better situation on their defensive line over the years. The Giants are really lacking beyond Dexter Lawrence. They have Raheem Nunez-Roches, who will give you some run stuffing, but absolutely no pass rush at all. And then they have low round draft picks who, frankly, just they're as bodies, and they haven't been cut yet because they were draft picks, and you keep draft picks around for a couple of years until you're sure they won't work out. But I don't think either of them, DJ Davidson or Jordan Riley, are really NFL caliber players. And so really he's been by himself in the middle, and the Giants haven't had much going on the edge either. And so he's ever since Leonard Williams, left, he's been by himself. And so he attracts, I think, a lot of the attention of the opposing team. He gets double teamed an awful lot. I can't tell you whether he gets double teamed more than Quinnen Williams or not.
He doesn't. Quinnen Williams was double teamed at the highest rate in the NFL last year.
Okay, but he gets double teamed an awful lot, and so I'm 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. I don't feel strongly about.
I mean, they're both great. They're both great players.
They're both great players. What I will say about Dexter Lawrence is that the Giants have this guy, this undrafted free agent that they brought in from SMU, Elijah Chapman, who looks like he shouldn't play in the NFL. He's listed, I think, as 6 feet and 278 pounds, but Ed Valentine told me he was standing next to him at practice last week, and he assures me that Elijah Chapman is not 6 feet tall. He's this little spark plug of a guy, and he has just looked great in practices, and he had this viral play on Saturday in Houston where he tracked down a Houston running back running 45 yards downfield to actually catch a Houston running back and run him out of bounds. I think that guy, that he may wind up by midseason being the Giants' starting IDL next to Dexter Lawrence, and if that turns out to be the case, I'll be interested to see how much attention they give to him versus Dexter Lawrence. But I could frankly care less whether Dexter Lawrence is better or worse than Quinnen Williams. They're both great players, and I think they're, as you say, they're up there with Chris Jones. Do I think Chris Jones is the best of all of them? I don't know. Maybe. I'm not sure.
I think it's debatable. I think they're both better run defenders than Chris Jones.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, it doesn't really matter. Now, in terms of the joint practice, give me an over/under on how many fights you think there will be.
Well, let's see. What are the temperatures aren't supposed to be that high? I think this week. I think we're getting our hot, humid days now. So we'll. Is Wednesday that is the day of the practice? Is that?
I'm not sure if it's Wednesday or Thursday.
Yeah. So I think it's supposed to be, I think, nicer weather by then. The Giants. So I'll tell you. I think that the Giants are not going to initiate anything because the Giants got into pretty much a free-for-all during their scrimmages against the Lions, and Dable was not happy about that whatsoever. And I'm pretty sure he's going to remind them that they don't want to be doing the garbage. That
the Giants got fined, right? They got fined like a lot.
$200,000, I believe, right? For it went on. It's it takes two to tango, okay? And the Lions were definitely not choir boys in that, but I think the situation. I'm not a football player. I've never spoken to a pro football player in my life, so I can't tell you what goes through their head, but I have to believe that the Giants, who got pushed around by the Lions in last year's preseason scrimmages, felt that they had something to prove, and especially this year against the Lions team that's considered to be one of the favorites to come out of the NFC for the Super Bowl. And I think that the Giants felt like that their job in that scrimmage was to stand up to that team, and they did. They played much better in this scrimmage than they did in last year's scrimmage. And I think the Lions didn't expect how intense the Giants were going to be. And so I think part of that fighting was due to the Lions themselves. How the Jets are going to approach this scrimmage against the Giants, I don't know. I remember the game last year. Things got a little heated there during the game, right? And we'll see. I'd put the odds at 50-50 that something breaks out during the scrimmage.
Well, okay, so I guess you're not familiar with this Jets player named Michael Clemens, number 72, who Jets fans loved last year, and after last year, not so much, because he came into, I don't remember if it was OTAs or training camp, shirtless while wielding a bat, and that really made Jets fans really get on it. They were really excited. And then he got into a fight with the Bills left tackle Deion Dawkins in the tunnel after a game where the Jets lost 32-6. And so Jets fans are just like, what on earth are you doing? And so he has started basically every fight that has happened for the Jets. And he threw a punch in last week's scrimmage against Carolina. And I would be willing to bet that he will throw another punch. And so even if the rest of the Jets don't fight, Michael Clemens will.
So I guess my question to you then, is what's Robert Saleh's reaction to that? Is he kind of happy to have somebody on the team who stirs things up like that, or is he ticked off that there's this player that he can't control? I have to admit that, and again from the outside, I've been very surprised at how Saleh's tenure has gone with the Jets. I saw him as a defensive coordinator for San Francisco, and he looked like this kind of fiery, take charge presence on the sideline and all of that. But since becoming the Jets head coach, and after his first news conference, where what was his phrase, what, all gas no brakes or something like that, on the Giants, he seemed to be kind of to be a for lack of a better word, a milquetoast as a head coach. And I'm surprised that the guy I thought I saw as a 49ers coach doesn't seem to be that way as a head coach. And I wonder whether he has, given his sort of precarious job situation, does he actually have the credibility, the authority to get his players to listen to him about things like that? And is he talking to someone like Clemens? I didn't know the stories about Clemens and what he had done, so I'm hearing this for the first time. But does he have the authority and the credibility with his own players to keep them in line like that and make sure that they don't do things? Or are the players tuning him out at this point? I don't know what the players' attitude about Salah is. If the players are kind of tuning him out, anticipating that he's going to be gone by the end of this season, or maybe before the end of the season, if things don't go well, then I guess I could imagine you're right, that the odds are very high that there will be that there'll be a fight going on. But other than that, I'm not sure. What I do think, though, is that there could be some very interesting matchups football-wise during the scrimmage and maybe during the game. I mean, you'll remember last year during the Giants-Jets game, what the Giants immediately did with Tyrod Taylor in the game was to send Jalen Hyatt out on a deep route against Sauce Gardner, right, a few times to see how that would go, right? And so I thought that was kind of interesting, and so I'm thinking about that, saying, well, what are they going to do with Malik Neighbors now during this game? Are they going to try to isolate Neighbors on Sauce and see how he does against Sauce and so on? And so I'll be curious as to whether they play those little mind games during the game that they're playing. Is I assume Aaron Rodgers is going to play some?
So far it looks like not. I mean, from Salah said they haven't made a decision yet, but they caused a whole hubbub in the media when he said a few weeks ago, he said, it looks like my instinct is not, that Rodgers wouldn't play in the preseason. And then Rodgers said in a press conference, that's news to me. So like he found out about it from the Jets PR guy. And so, of course, people cause a hubbub. Oh, there's a power struggle between Salah and Rodgers. It looks like he's probably not going to play. Now, to answer your first question about whether the Jets respect players or he has any authority in the locker room, I think it's more, I'm not sure if it's so much that he doesn't have authority because he's a lame duck to an extent. I think it's more that he's always been a player's coach, at least since he joined the Jets. And he tends to not to take such a strict hand with them. And so they tend to do whatever they want because he's just not that strict. And so he officially has a rule, no punches, meaning he thinks the pushing and shoving is fine. His official rule is no punches. Well, we've seen the Jets players throw punches in virtually whether in their own practices or in joint practices. And so when Sauce Gardner was interviewed, and he implied that there is some sort of punishment consequence that no player would want for throwing a punch. But then we saw Clemens throw a punch in last week against Carolina. So I would be interested to know if he got that consequence and what it is. Yeah. And maybe we would see evidence of whether there is that by whether Clemens throws another punch, but I'm fully expecting that to happen. Because again, Salah is he takes a very laid back approach with these things. Like we saw a couple years ago in the preseason, Quinnen Williams had a terrible hit on Jalen Hurts out of bounds, like 2 steps out of bounds at least. Preseason totally unnecessary. Didn't come out for a play, nothing. We've seen Jets players get called for horrible, terrible personal fouls that were totally unnecessary, and it doesn't seem like there was any pushback on it. Jets players post things on social media that they shouldn't on a regular basis, and they don't seem to be told not to do it. And so, I mean, look, in terms of that, I don't think it's because his job situation is precarious. I think that's just how he runs his locker room, mostly for worse.
Yeah, I would say comparison, Brian Daboll. Well, Brian Daboll is a little bit of a Jekyll and Hyde character. I mean, he also, I think, is very much a player's coach and is very supportive of the players. None of us know what he's like behind closed doors and things like that, but certainly in general in his dealings with the players, he seems to have a very positive relationship with them. But then, of course, he turns into monster Brian Daboll when he's on the sidelines in the middle of the game and somebody does something really stupid, like when Daniel Jones threw his pick six to Devin Witherspoon during the Seattle game, when Tyrod Taylor got a play call first half on the 2-yard line of Buffalo or something like that. And Taylor said it was an alert, and he switched to the run instead of throwing the pass. So the clock ran out when the Giants didn't get into the end zone and things like that. So you'll see Dable boil over in all of those situations. I mean, I saw during the fights that they got into with Detroit, he wasn't going crazy with the players either. I mean, he was stepping in to make sure they broke things up and so on and so forth. And who knows what he said to them on the field at the time or in the locker room later. However, my guess is that he probably kind of liked it because he saw a team that he thinks that he thought that everybody thought had been bullied by the Lions last season in their scrimmages, and he saw them stand up to the Lions and really kind of play them evenly on the field as well. And he probably kind of liked that. So I wouldn't be surprised if he had a little smirk or something like that. You can say, "Oh, guys, you can't do that," and then but inside you're going, "Hey,
wink and a nod." Yeah. I would definitely see that.
Yeah.
Now,
But I was going to say, but he doesn't want them. He does not want them to be headhunters, and so I don't think that he wants to get something going. And my guess is that it's really a golden opportunity for both teams, since they play in the same place so close. Well, I mean, the Jets training camp is farther away, but they're within very short distance of each other, and it's really a golden opportunity to be able to actually have, I think, that practice every year, in addition to any other scrimmage that you might do with another team in the NFL that you have to travel someplace for. It's always better to be playing against other teams, and you get much more of a line on your team's capabilities when you're playing against other guys than when you're just playing against each other. That's something we talk about a lot during training camp. There's the fans pass judgment on the Giants every day of training camp. Oh, the offense looked terrible today. Well, was it that the offense was terrible, or did the defense have a really good game? Well, what do you want? And I guess it's
always a problem.
You kind of want it to be 50-50, that the defense wins some, the offense wins some, and so on and so forth. But you don't really know how to size up your team until you're actually seeing them against something else. So I would guess that they don't want the situation to devolve into something so bad that they feel like they have to stop this little mini tradition of the two teams getting together for a practice during the last week, because to me, it's just a golden opportunity for both teams to get something done while minimizing the amount of travel that you're doing. And from the Giants' standpoint, I'm glad that they're going up against the Jets, just because the Jets are a contending team. I'd much rather see them going up against a team like that than a team that's predicted to finish at the bottom of the standings, where you don't know how to interpret what you're getting. So I think it's very valuable for a team like the Giants, who needs to see good competition.
Now, as far as what you said about Malik Nabers and Sauce Gardner, so I suspect that if Rodgers doesn't play in the preseason game, then maybe none of their starters will. I don't know for sure, because again, that's the defensive side of the ball. It could be that they would keep the offensive players out and play the defensive players. It could be they'll play no one. It could be they'll play everyone else. No one really knows what their plan will be. Certainly in the joint practice, it will be interesting to see, Nabers against the Jets. The Jets defense. The thing about the way the Jets, so first of all, the Jets slot cornerback Michael Carter II has been out for a lot of training camp. I don't know if he's back yet, but he's been out a lot. And if Nabers lines up in the slot, so he's going to be going against the backup cornerback. And so that might be a little bit more take it with a grain of salt, just in terms of if he is in the slot. If he plays outside, he could just as easily go up against DJ Reed as Sauce Gardner, because the way the Jets play their defense is they keep their cornerbacks on one side of the field for the most part exclusively. Basically, DJ Reed plays, it's right cornerback on the left, meaning on the left side of the offense, the right side of the defense, and Sauce Gardner plays left cornerback, so on the left side of the right side of the offense, the left side of the defense. That's for the most part what the Jets do, and so wherever the Giants would line up Nabers, that's where the matchup would be. But yes, it would definitely be interesting. And to see Hyatt against Sauce is obviously interesting because Hyatt is just so fast and runs those deeper, vertical routes. And so it'd be interesting to see that. And in general, I mean, how the offensive lines go against the defensive lines and things like that. The Jets without Haason Reddick want to see what their pressure looks like. Now, last week, Quinnen Williams had a sore shoulder, so he didn't play in the scrimmage. And the Jets pass rush was pretty bad. I mean, it wasn't really there. And so you kind of wonder about their edge rushers without Haason Reddick there and what's going to be. But then again, today, Will McDonald had according to reports, had a great practice and looked like he had multiple sacks. So you never know with these players. But it'll definitely be interesting to see how it goes. How do the Jets block Dexter Lawrence up the middle and things like that?
How do the Jets feel about Jermaine Johnson? Because I mean, I have to say that I've envied few things in my life more than the Jets 2022 draft. I mean, watching them come away with Sauce and then Garrett Wilson and then Jermaine Johnson and then Breece Hall in first and second rounds. Like, oh my God, what a draft! But so is Jermaine Johnson progressing into something good or?
So I'll tell you, his rookie year, he didn't play a lot. He was pretty quiet. Last year, first 3 games, he was silent. He literally didn't do anything. I think he had 1 pressure in the first 3 games. And then he exploded. For basically from the 4th game on, he played. I mean, he was a Pro Bowl alternate last year. He ended up making the Pro Bowl when someone else stepped out. He's a very good run defender, and his pass rush definitely took a big step up last year. He learned to use his leverage. He's very strong naturally, and so he learned really to use better leverage on his bull rushes, and he was much more effective that way. The question to the Jets is he's already a very good player. The question to the Jets is, can he take another step up and become like a really, a top 10 edge rusher? Because I would say he's probably about 20, in the 20 range right now, just in terms of if you combine his pass rush and his run defense. The question is, can he become like really, a great pass rusher, or is he always going to be a good player, not a great player? Mm-hmm. And so that's really what the question is this season. And obviously bringing in Haason Reddick was supposed to help the Jets have another player who garners a lot of attention, which should have made things easier for Johnson. Now, if Johnson is their top edge rusher and Will McDonald is on the other side, I mean, that obviously Quinnen Williams takes up a lot of attention in the middle, but that puts a lot more pressure on Johnson to become that top flight player and not just a good player. And so again, he's a good player. And so far after his second year, they got him at 26th overall. That definitely lived up to his draft status. He had 7.5 sacks. I mean, not elite, but again, with his pressure, he also had a pick 6 where he jumped up on Joe Flacco, batted the ball in the air, caught it, and ran for a touchdown. He had a blocked punt. He had several pass deflections. He had 1 pass deflection on Jalen Hurts that led to an interception by Quinnen Williams. So he was kind of all over the place. The Jets lined him up actually standing up in the middle at times on 3rd down. And so he had matchups against guards, which he would bully them. And so, again, he's a good player and definitely developing nicely. The question is if he can take another step up this
year. Yeah. And that describes the Giants' edge situation as well. Will Thibodeau become a better player than we've seen in his first 2 years with Burns on the other side, maybe taking some of the attention away? How good exactly, as we already discussed, can Burns be? Because the Giants' problem, well, not the Giants' problem, the Giants have had many problems, but I would say, an overall problem for the Giants is that they just haven't had enough elite players, whether we're talking offense or defense, right? They have those few like Dexter Lawrence, Andrew Thomas, who's a very good tackle, and so on. But they have not had elite players at most of the other positions, and you're looking for that, and especially I think at edge defender, you're looking for that. You're looking for that one guy who just that other teams come in and say, oh, this guy's a problem, and we've got to keep a tight end on his side, and always try to chip him, and whatever, and then that affects other things that the offense is trying to do and frees things up for the other edge defender who's not getting as much attention. And so I think having that person who can be an elite edge defender is such an important thing, which is why. Yeah, you have to think that the Haason Reddick situation will resolve itself at some point, because he's such a devastating pass rusher. I mean, he doesn't really do much of anything else, but he's such a devastating pass rusher that it's hard not to believe they can't find a way to get him onto the team.
So just to add a few things about Haason Reddick, which have not been reported in the national media. So there's a few things. First of all, Haason Reddick is asking for between $25 and $28 million per year. Haason Reddick will be 30 years old in a month. Haason Reddick is a speed rusher. Which team is giving a speed rusher who's 30 years old $25 million per year? Mm-hmm. There's also a reason why Haason Reddick was available for several months. Because what happened was teams would call the Eagles, find out what he was asking for, and hang up the phone, which there were reports about that. I think what happened was the Jets, another thing that people have totally not said is when the Jets traded for Haason Reddick, in addition to Jermaine Johnson, they also had John Franklin Myers. John Franklin Myers is one of the more underrated players around the NFL. Jets fans knew what he was, but around the NFL, people never even knew who he was. John Franklin Myers, great edge defender. You're not going to see it on PFF because PFF seems not to value setting the edge. They only value making plays. But, really, really good job on the edge. Really hard to run against him. 289 pounds, one of the biggest, if not the biggest edge defender in the NFL. And so really did a great job at that. Was probably a slightly above average pass rusher from the edge. But also what the Jets would do is they would kick him inside on third downs and obvious passing situations. And he's a great interior pass rusher. And so they had him between his value on the edge and just his versatility. He was a really good player for them. So when the Jets traded for Reddick, they have these two guys. Franklin Myers was a starter for them. They had Jermaine Johnson on the other side. They looked at it and said, Reddick is a luxury. He's not a necessity. If Reddick doesn't play, we still have two very capable edge rushers. So they got Reddick as at that time, we looked at it as this is just it's adding to their team. It's sort of a completing piece, but it's not a necessary piece. And that is likely why Reddick probably did give them a verbal agreement that he would play, because he had no leverage in that situation. Then the Jets traded John Franklin Myers, in my opinion, idiotically, for a 6th round pick from Denver. And now he looks at it and he says, now I'm a starting edge rusher, and they don't have leverage on him. And so then he decided he can ask for all this money. And so everyone's clowning the Jets, but the truth is, and yes, they should have made sure they had something in writing. But the truth is, he probably did and he was probably okay with playing on that contract or whatever the Jets would offer him with more incentives and guaranteed money until they traded John Franklin Myers. So from his perspective, when he came in, he didn't have any leverage. Once they traded him, he had leverage. Now, just one other thing. Two of the Jets' main beat writers, Rich Cimini of ESPN and Zach Rosenblatt of The Athletic, both believe that Reddick will not play in week 1. They think that what he's betting on is that the Jets pass rush will suffer tremendously in week 1, and then they'll go and cave into his demands. There are two problems with that. Number one, there is the potential that the Jets edge rush could be good in that game, particularly since the 49ers right tackle stinks, Colt McKivitz. And that's where Reddick lines up a lot on the left side of the defensive line, right side of the offensive line. Second of all, the Jets schedule for the next 4
know that.
Yeah.
Giants fans have nightmares about Reddick.
Yeah. And then the second thing is that the Jets' next 4 games after San Francisco in week 1 are not very difficult. They're playing the Titans, the Patriots. I can't remember who the other games are, but like the Cardinals, I think, and like one other team that they probably should beat. And so the Jets could kind of say, look, we'll see you we're not negotiating with you until week 6. That already brings them closer. He has to report by week 8, or his contract is going to toll, which means the Jets will still have his rights next year. So he'll lose a full year of pay and he won't have more leverage. And so I think the Jets are really dug in over here, and they're saying, we're not going to negotiate with you until you report, and your number has to come down from $25 million because there's no one else in the NFL who's going to give you $25 million.
So I guess then, my or not my question, because it seems like you've already answered it by indicating that it didn't make sense, is why did they trade JFM? And why did they trade JFM when they did? Maybe that's the more important question. So trading him for a 6th round pick seems like not very much compensation. And is there a reason that trade had to be made at the moment that it was made? Were they looking to get rid of him for some reason? Did they need to do it for salary cap purposes, or was there some other reason to do it? Because from the story that you've laid out, then they could have just not made that trade, and then they might have gotten Reddick to put his name on the dotted line, and then they could have made the trade after that.
So this is the thing about John Franklin Myers. His cap hit this year was supposed to be 16.3 million, and a lot of that was base salary, from what I recall. I can't remember exactly what the numbers were. So the Jets were trying to get him to take a pay cut, and according to what he tweeted out himself. He said the Jets were never offering him close to what Denver gave, and Denver gave him 2 years, 15 million. I don't remember how much was guaranteed. I think it was 12. But honestly, I don't really there. It seems to me like the Jets were looking to replace JFM all along because they went after Jadeveon Clowney, who seems to have a lot of similar traits. Really good run defender. Maybe slightly, maybe he had a better year last year, but overall in his career has been a slightly above average pass rusher, not a great pass rusher. Maybe wasn't going to move inside on passing downs, but overall that same profile, in which case I think they would have traded JFM anyway. I still don't understand why they couldn't just offer JFM 2 years and 15 million, because giving $7.5 million to a player of his caliber is chump change.
Yeah.
The thing that I've heard a lot is that JFM was not going to give the Jets that kind of discount because he wants more playing time. The Jets, he only played last year, I believe, 55% of their snaps. And the Jets tend to rotate their defensive linemen. Like, the condition, Reddick was traded for a conditional third-round pick that would become a second if he got 10 sacks, and he played 67.5% of the snaps. The reason the number was 67.5 was because last year the Jets edge defender who played the most snaps, who was Jermaine Johnson, played 66%. And most of their edge defenders play less than that. And so they said Reddick is not going to play more than that. We're going to we can give up that conditional, stay a third. Now, JFM probably wanted more playing time, and that is likely why he wouldn't have given the Jets that discount. But according to what he says, the Jets never even offered him that. And if that's the case, the Jets disrespected him very much as a player, and I frankly don't understand why.
Yeah. I mean, thank God I'm not a GM. It's a tough.
Thank God you're not a GM, but as hard as it is to be a Giants fan right now, it's hard to be a Jets fan. The Jets get made fun of in the media constantly. It's like same old Jets. I mentioned Tanier made fun of the Giants in his column. The Giants have 2 Super Bowls this century. The Jets don't have a Super Bowl in 55 years or whatever.
Right.
So it's that much harder. Yeah, and so being a GM is one thing. Look, Joe Douglas gets clowned in the media. Obviously now he's getting completely clowned in the media. Although, I would say the one thing you're right is that maybe they should have kept JFM until they got Reddick to sign whatever contract he did. Yeah, that is true. I think they wanted to get something in the draft, or maybe they didn't want to carry his cap hit. I'm not sure exactly what the thought process was, but there is some part of the Haason Reddick situation that is not being properly reported nationally. And so there's more to it also in terms of play. I mean, look, Matt Judon was just traded. The Falcons have no intention of giving him another deal, at least according to what's been reported. And so they're not getting made fun of, and he's making $6.5 million this year. Reddick is making 14.25.
Mm-hmm.
So, and by the way, Judon is a better all-around player than Reddick is. Yeah. Defends the run very well. And so, look, the situation is what it is, but it still will be interesting to see, this joint practice, Jets and Giants. Oh, before we finish, I have one interesting story to tell you. I don't know if you heard this. I don't know if you heard this last year, but Aaron Rodgers said something interesting in his recent practice. He was talking about, recent press conference. He was talking about how preseason doesn't usually matter because teams are not playing their coverages. They're playing just vanilla. And so, for a quarterback, you don't really get to see anything. Like you're just dumping. It's very basic. But then he said something. He said last year when the Jets played the Giants, Wink Martindale, before the game, told Rodgers that he was just going to play cover 3 all the time. Mm-hmm. First snap, he comes out in a cover 0 look. so Rodgers audibles from a run play to a backside screen to Garrett Wilson.
Uh-huh.
Because the coverage was off. Next play, cover 0. Third play, cover 0. And that's how Wink basically played the 2 drives. And so he said, he's like, okay, against Wink, I actually got some experience. It was real play, but for the most part, it's not real. I just found that very interesting because it was so typical Wink Martindale.
Right. I don't think you'll see that this year because all indications are that the Giants' new defensive coordinator Shane Bowen is a pretty kind of straight by the book guy, and all right, everybody's trying to fool the opposition, but I think Bowen is not that type of personality. Bowen seems to be an extremely low-key personality, and I think he just is interested in seeing which guys perform and who's he going to want to keep on the team and who does he want to get rid of. And I think he I think he probably could care less about that type. I could be wrong. There could be some kind of drama over that, but he seems to be an extremely low key guy. I mean, Wink Martindale is an interesting character for many different reasons. You saw the story that Saquon Barkley called him as soon as he left the Giants for the Eagles, and after Wink had his not very nice departure from the Giants, and he called Wink Martindale to ask him. Or no, I'm sorry, it wasn't Saquon Barkley. It was Jalen Hurts called Wink Martindale to ask him what he was doing on defense against the Eagles last year that gave them so much trouble, because the Giants did beat the Eagles once and were not far from beating them time last year, and so Wink gave him a lowdown on what he was doing to give Hurts problems, which I think is kind of an interesting thing to do. But of course, given the way Wink left the Giants, I guess it's not surprising. Yeah, I don't see any of that happening with Shane Bowen though.
Okay, I think on that note, I think we've gone a nice long time. I'll give you a chance just to plug your stuff. Obviously, these are mostly Jet fans, but still tell people where they can find you, what you're up to.
Well, they can find me on Big Blue View in case you're interested in reading anything about the other team in town. And I'm one of the staff writers there. I don't do regular news features there. I just do kind of occasional, more feature type analysis type articles about the team, and I got one up there this afternoon about what Brian Daboll is trying to do with Daniel Jones this year to turn him into a type of quarterback that he hasn't really been yet in his career. And you'll see me once or twice a week on Big Blue View.
Okay, well, and I will definitely plug Tony's articles because they're excellent. Now I guess that's it for us, but please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Subscribe to jetsxfactor.com, discount code 80, and subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you, and have a great day.